Welcome to Creative Imperfections. I'm Kelly, and I am so glad you're here. Think of this podcast as your safe place to be your beautifully messy self. Let's dive in. There's an interesting paradox that I see showing up in creative work. And honestly, once you see it, you can't really unsee it. On the surface, creativity is about expression. It's about putting something of yourself out into the world. Your voice, your perspective, your interpretation of something human. But if we're honest, creativity can also become one of the most elegant hiding places we have. You can spend hours crafting something beautiful, something polished, something that is technically excellent, and yet somehow still remain completely hidden inside of it. And that's the strange tension between authenticity and performance in creative work. Are you expressing yourself or are you protecting yourself? Because those two things can look almost identical from the outside. The work might still be good, it might even be great, but the energy behind it is different. When you're authentic in your work, there is a certain aliveness to it, a presence. It feels like you're standing behind what you've created, not just presenting it. And there's a sense that a real person exists on the other side of it. But when we're hiding behind our work, the focus shifts. We lean into technique, we lean into perfection, we lean into what we think people expect from us. It becomes less about saying something true and more about saying something safe. And safety is seductive. Safety tells us we'll avoid criticism. Safety promises we won't be misunderstood. Safety says if you just keep things polished enough, nobody will see the vulnerable parts. But here's the thing, those vulnerable parts are exactly where your authenticity lives. Authenticity isn't about oversharing your life or turning everything into a confession. It's not about exposing every insecurity or narrating every struggle. Authenticity is something different. Authenticity is when the work actually sounds like you, the person. Not the version of you that you think will be approved of, not the version that fits neatly into the expectations of the industry, the audience, or the algorithm. The real voice, the real perspective, the real way that you see the world. And that's where many creatives get stuck because authenticity requires something that perfection doesn't. It requires risk. When your work is polished but impersonal, criticism bounces off a little easier. It's not really about you, it's about the work, the technique, the execution. But when something you create carries your real perspective, your real interpretation, your real voice, suddenly the stakes feel higher. Now the question becomes, what if people don't like it? And that's the moment many creatives retreat back into safety. We adjust our tone, smooth the edges, filter ourselves just enough to stay acceptable. And slowly over time, the work becomes more impressive, but less alive. The strange irony is that audiences are incredibly good at sensing authenticity, even when they can't articulate why. They don't always respond to the most perfect work. They respond to the most honest work. You can see this everywhere. The actor whose performance feels human rather than performed. The writer whose words feel like they came from a real moment instead of a polished template. The artist whose work feels slightly imperfect but unmistakably alive. Authenticity doesn't erase skill, it amplifies it. But skill alone can't create connection. People connect to presence. And presence only shows up when you stop hiding behind your work. Now, hiding behind the work isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's actually part of the process. Early in our careers, technique is how we build confidence. We learn the structure, we learn the craft, we learn what works and what doesn't, and that stage matters a lot. But eventually something has to shift. Because if technique remains your shield forever, your work stops evolving. At some point, The question becomes less about, is this correct? And more about, is this honest? And let me tell you, that shift can feel uncomfortable. You might worry that authenticity will make the work messy or too personal or not professional enough. But authenticity rarely makes work worse. What it usually does is make it recognizable. It's recognizable as yours. And that's the real goal for any creative, right? Not perfection, recognition. When someone hears your work and thinks, that sounds like them. Not because you're repeating yourself, but because your voice is unmistakably present inside it. So here's something to reflect on this week. When you're working on something, whether it's a performance, a piece of writing, a project, or even a conversation, pause for a moment and ask yourself a simple question. Am I expressing something here, or am I protecting myself? There's no judgment in either answer. Sometimes protection is necessary. Sometimes we're still building the courage to be seen. But the magic in creative work almost always appears on the other side of that question. Not when the work is perfect, but when it's real. And when you stop hiding behind the work long enough to actually stand inside it, that's where the connection happens. That is where people can feel you. And that's where creative work stops being impressive and starts being unforgettable. Thank you for listening to Creative Imperfections. Always remember, there's magic in the mess. If you enjoyed this episode, share it, subscribe, and keep showing up for your beautifully imperfect journey. Until next time.